This recording begins at 21:59 hours GMT on Monday, the 27th of July 2020. This is the third in the series of the KhoodeelaarTV channel seminars, introducing support for the worldwide project that is being launched under the banner of End Hunger at Root. Now, this is being launched from London, and it will be spread across the world with appropriate links and connections and participation over time. And this is being intended to produce the framework of audit, transparency, engagement references that the United Nations and its various agencies should have been actively encouraging and been involved in, but they haven't been. So, in the course of the coming programs, we shall be examining the evidence of the United Nations, lack of connection, engagement, and activities to end poverty at root. The idea is that eventually ending poverty at root will be done by using the resources of the people in their own places, in their own homes, in their own communities, societies, and countries. And that would stop the need for them to leave home and migrate elsewhere in the world. And this will solve the problem caused by the failure of the United Nations and the continuation of the colonialist, imperialist economic models of having people so desperate that they leave their own homes. And many of them, any number of them, die in the process of reaching the so-called destination where they think that the solution to the hunger and poverty and famine and starvation lie. That is not the case. That never has been the case. And whatever gloss there has been a misleading gloss created to suit the purpose of the people who exploit the desperate people as obviously cheap labor, but as not worth any human recognition. It's not just cheap labor, but without any human rights at any level. Brazenly contrary to the charter rights enshrined in all the United Nations charters and extended by example in the Treaty of Rome and others that were being adhered to apparently by the membership of the European Union. Outside of the European Union, the situation is even worse. So what the world needs, what these people need is solutions to their economic needs at home, not leaving home, not losing home, not being homeless internationally and regionally, wherever they actually desperately look for a home with food and shelter and absence of hunger and famine and want. There have been many charitable organizations, including War on Want based in the UK. War on Want has lost its appeal in the recent decades, but there was this initiative. And other similar comparable organizations have existed both in the UK and the USA, in other parts of the Western countries, Western hemisphere, and they have been along the same kind of model lines. They are charitable empires or imperialistic charities. They are not really designed to empower the people in poverty and hunger and famine, but to use hunger, famine, and poverty as the pretext, plausible pretext, to serve as the cover for proselytization, cultural imperialism. And we have to address all of this if we are to get away from reliance on either this faith or this culture or that culture, this nationality or that nationality, and reach out to people who are dying, literally dying, losing their lives because of hunger and famine and poverty. So this is the general summary, and the problems of hunger and poverty and famine will be examined in detail as we progress with the broadcasts. And hopefully, we can reach enough people in the countries concerned and across the rest of the world where there is this acknowledgement that the United Nations agencies are not delivering what they should have been delivering. They have had the resources in terms of the money, but they have not had the actual narrative, the agenda. And that is where the failure has actually prevailed. And the other thing is that the United Nations has failed to stop wars, massacres like the ones going on in Yemen and in the rest of the Middle East, and in relation to the statements issued from time to time routinely by the United Nations condemning and abhorring and denying any association with these regimes that are perpetrating the violations of human rights and infliction of poverty and hunger and famine and massacre and genocide. There has been no real mechanism for auditing. So we shall be seeking to raise awareness so that people, ordinary people, can audit and look at the actual evidence of the behavior of the United Nations and its agencies, and look at the diversionary agenda that is followed by the United Nations General Assembly, the Security Council, and others. And we shall be looking, first of all, at cases that we shall be verifying the veracity of, and then we shall broadcast and share with viewers the actual depth of the losses and the violations. Some of the news that every day is contained in the mainstream, in the Western media. Mainstream Western media is also the dominant media in the mainstream that dominates the actual news outlets, so-called news outlets operating in Asia and Africa. And there is this complete contradiction because the mainstream Western media, because of their power, they don't actually have to account for the lack of substance relevant to the countries in Asia and Africa. So their lack of substance is repeated, and the actual reality of hunger, famine, and starvation is overlooked or underreported or misreported by the news outlets operating in those countries, those regions. So the facts are being suppressed unintentionally and by structural diversion from the reality because of the subscription by these local agencies to the mainstream media outlets based in the West and running the Western commentary and the narrative. And that narrative is based on denial of colonialism, imperialism, on the economic devastation left by the so-called ex-colonial so-called powers. And the fact that the UK withdrew, retreated from the subcontinent of Bangladesh and India and Pakistan in 1947, that has not been followed by an examination, even by those countries, of the evidence of the previous 190 years to 200 years of exploitation, robbery, and plunder and looting of the resources and the decimation of of society and the disenfranchisement of the people and the lack of articulation and advocacy that was inflicted institutionally and individually by the education system that was authored in the case of Britain and its empire by Thomas Babington Macaulay. Thomas Babington Macaulay may have died, and the British colony may have left the subcontinent, but both are very much active in the whole of the subcontinent. Despite the fact that there are linguistic demands for language rights across the subcontinent by various groups, the fact is that English remains the dominant language of discourse. And you have to see the screens of these countries. They are using English language words and subtitles and main headings, and themes are being written in English, not in the local languages, whatever the language may be. So that shows the dependence on the imperialistic attitude and culture. And the universities in Bangladesh, in India, in Pakistan have never been independent of the British agenda, British educational brainwashing agenda, authored by Thomas Babington Macaulay in 1835. And for example, in the university departments supposedly teaching economics, they are not teaching economics about the economic potential, the economic resources of the countries concerned. They are repeating the completely blind and diversionary, absolute in denial rubbish created and scripted 70 years ago, 80 years ago, 100 years ago by the imperialist education policymakers and authors and professors. And what is happening in the Western universities now is a denial of the resources of the people in the Western countries. So it's an elite that is actually diverting attention even of the Western, ordinary Western people from the resources, the powers that they have otherwise, but they have been diverted from asserting ownership of their resources. And it is 10 times, 20 times worse in the case of Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and other so-called now post-colonial independent countries. And so end hunger at root is not just ending hunger at the if you like mealtime, but ending hunger and poverty at all levels, at all times. And that is the agenda that we shall be supporting. And any organization, any initiative, more than one, that agrees with this and supports this, we shall be supporting them, and we shall be reciprocating on the evidence, strictly on the basis of evidence. And in terms of the political implication for ending hunger at root, it is incalculable, it's absolutely enormous, because the hostility shown to so-called migrants by the races operating in the countries in the West, the so-called host countries, the hostility is mainly based on a doubly misconceived and distorted assumption and assertion that the migrants are taking away the economic benefits or economic kind of advantage of the host countries and societies. So we shall be examining the evidence, starting with Britain, starting with London, for example, or parts of England, UK, and we shall be putting the facts on the table, on the platform, online, on the record, so that there is the possibility and the ease and the access of checking the veracity of what we say and what we post and publish. And we shall be doing that regularly every day, and we shall be doing that parallel with other programs that we shall be broadcasting, dedicated to particular issues that we shall examine at length in relation to London in relation to England, UK, Britain, Europe, the world, and the environment. And we shall be introducing a regular feature about animals. And we shall be looking at the cultural implication of animal welfare and the contribution that the animals make to the planet. And the care of the planet we shall be dedicating to the examination of the protection of the environment, the ecology, and how the entire education curriculum everywhere has been devoid of attention to the reality of the environment, the ecology, and the rights and the needs and the welfare of the animals. And as we have said before, the communities, various communities, including in the case of, say, Tower Hamlets in the east end of London, many families are torturing animals, including big-sized fishes that they keep in very small containers with small waters. And we shall be asking these people to let these animals go, free them, and not to torture them and punish them, because it is not caring for them, let alone millions of miles away from loving them. And we shall come to all of these in detail as we progress. This is called a seminar because it is introducing original summary of the evidence that we have gathered over the years and is always mounting up. One of the things that actually perpetuates the ignorance and allows the hunger and poverty and famine and starvation to continue as the norm is, of course, the area of the mainstream media. In the case of Britain, hunger and poverty and famine have been actually affecting, contrary to the normal mythology, many white people that are indigenous. White people on whose behalf those who advocated the brazen agenda of the Brexiteers, they have been exploiting the poverty and the denial and the deprivation of the indigenous white people who they say have been made poor or kept in poverty by the arrival of the migrants from Europe. These migrants mainly, the migrants from Europe mainly have been fellow white migrants, white people. And the evidence is that without those migrants from Europe, mainly the white migrants, because that is the demographic background in the original countries or the countries of origin or originating communities across the European Union membership countries. Those people have been keeping vital, absolutely vital, daily needed services going in Britain, active in Britain. So, when occasionally some of the reporters have come across these people who complain that the EU migrants are taking away jobs of the indigenous native Brits. Those native Brits have not been able to answer the question, why don't they do the job? Why don't they do the work? So we go back to the mentality and the narrative and the agenda created, fostered by Thomas Babington Macaulay in the 19th century, in 1835 Education Act so-called, that the British, the English speakers are inherently superior to other people, people who speak other languages. And that is something that is part of the ingrained poverty that has been built into the British society, inequality built into the British society and the British social fabric by the succession of people who have been members of parliament or members of the governments, whatever the government color has been. And the evidence is not because I am saying it, the evidence has been that despite the fact that the Labour Party was built as the alternative to the exploitative, oppressive, cruel, negligent Conservative Party, the Labour Party in power has failed to show a comprehensive evidence of providing the alternative answer, that is socially better, societally better, economically better, in terms of human rights better. So we shall be examining the poverty of ideology, poverty of government policy, poverty of government being fronted by people who claim to be representing the party or the ideology or the agenda or the manifesto addressing poverty. And we can go to India and we can look at the time of the Nehru family in power over decades. At the end of the Nehru family's kind of period in power, there was a slogan called Garibi Hatao. Now remove poverty, get rid of poverty. Now that has not happened. In fact, poverty became increasingly a phenomenon during the last decades of the Nehru family, Nehru dynasty. One of the reasons why the current Indian regime, central regime of the coalition of far-right Hinduist, Brahminist nationalists are in power is because the Nehru family let down hundreds of millions of Indians. And the Nehru family didn't have any actual agenda to alleviate poverty, let alone free the victims of poverty in India from hunger, famine, and starvation and dehumanized treatment. So that is the reason why the Brahminists, BJP, is in power and the Nehru family is out of power. And in the last few years that the Nehru family is fronted, Congress has been out of power, there has been no narrative, no comprehensive, cohesive narrative as the future of India, the future against poverty, hunger, and famine across India from the Nehru family fronted opposition, so-called Congress. And the same thing applies to the poverty inflicted on people based on religion across India, especially in the northeast and in central India and northwestern India. People have been disenfranchised openly, and with the collusion of the so-called Supreme Court of India, which has colluded with the anti-human rights, anti-democratic steps taken by the BJP, and these were actually coming in the offing during the last years of the Nehru family fronted Congress regime in India. So the poverty and hunger affecting hundreds of millions of people in India has been caused by democratic frontage associated by the West romantically with Jawaharlal Nehru and his daughter Indira Gandhi as the world's biggest democracy. Poverty has been created by the world's biggest democracy to the largest number of people anywhere in one country or one federal country in the world. So, end hunger at root will be addressing the poverty of India, the human rights violations of India, and how integrally related the political assertion and democratic accountability is and remains and will remain to the elimination, removal of and freedom from poverty and hunger and famine. So we shall be stopping here at 23 hours GMT on Monday, 27th of July, 2020. And this seminar will continue, and it will continue at present without any particular list of scheduled time, depending on the other logistical factors that are involved. But we shall be working out a schedule whereby daily schedule, the list of items and list of subjects covered by various broadcasts will be posted online on the Khoodeelaar website, Khoodeelaar website on the Facebook account and also on the Khoodeelaar Twitter. And we shall be publishing the details in due course during the rest of the week, hopefully. And until the next program, Khuda Hafiz and goodbye.